Babylon, man, I've been so torn thinking about this world lately. Babylon, truth is so deluded and it drives me crazy. Babylon, this lost world is so hopeless. Babylon, Jesus Christ, that's where hope is. Babylon, no matter what they say, it's still so lost. Listen.
To whom then will you liken me, or shall I be equal, saith the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things, that bringeth out their host by number. He calleth them all by names, by the greatness of his might, for that he is strong in power. Not one faileth. Why sayest thou, O Jacob, and speaketh, O Israel? My way is hid from the Lord, and my judgment is passed over from my God. Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary? There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. That is Isaiah 40, verses 25 through 31. And this is Resisting Balaam, a podcast where we seek to encourage the saints to stand firm with him on his word against all the accusations made by the world and the flesh and the devil, as we engage the culture of death that demands the sacrifice of our children. I am Callie, and this is Resisting Balaam. This is a Wrath and Grace podcast, so go check out their website, check out their new app, and all of the other podcasts, books, musicians, and such that they have on their website. You can support us at patreon.com/resisting Balaam. There are different tiers. You can get different pieces of merchandise for your donations, as well as early content, member-only content. And you can help us support us by your donations. This allows us to create new content and better content and get a greater reach as we seek to engage the culture of death. So I was just talking about Wrath and Grace and their publications. Today, I will be talking with a friend of mine, Nick Kennicott, who is an author on Wrath and Grace. You can check out his book, In Praise of Old Guys. Nick, why don't you introduce yourself real quick to us?
Sure. Glad to be with you, Callie. Thanks for having me on. My name is Nick Kennicott. I have been the pastor of Redeemer Baptist Church in Rincon, Georgia. We're just right outside of Savannah since 2007. So 14 years I've been here. I am a father of 3 children. I have a 12-year-old girl, a 9-year-old girl, and a 6-year-old boy. My wife Felicia and I have been married for 18. We're going on 18 years. So we had our 17-year anniversary back in July. So we have a great family. Very thankful for the Lord's care for us and His preservation of our family, and we delight in the gift of marriage and parenting. It's been a wonderful journey for us. So I grew up in Colorado. I was saved at a fairly young age. The Lord was kind to me in His providence, and although my parents were not Christians, I would go to church with friends as a young child, really, and go and learn the scriptures, and did a lot of things in churches that I certainly wouldn't have us do in our church today. But the Lord uses all kinds of means to bring His people to Himself, and thankfully, I was the result of some of that. And so, um, when I got out of high school, I went to college for a few years at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, where I met my wife.
When was
And
that? When were you in Albuquerque?
let's see, I was in New Mexico starting in 1998, and I was there through 2000. In 2002 is when I left New Mexico.
Dude, we were in Albuquerque at the same time.
Wow, interesting. I didn't realize that. I never knew you were there. Okay.
Yeah, I owned a house, 420 San Pedro,
Okay.
just
Yeah.
on the opposite side of the war zone. So,
Yeah. Exactly. That's a good way to describe it. And unfortunately, to this day, exactly how it needs to be described. So,
sorry
yeah,
about that.
things
Yeah.
things didn't. No, you're fine, fine. Things weren't great for me in New Mexico. I really was at a loss for where I was going and what I was doing in my life, and so I did what every searching young man in terms of life and career does, and just decided to sign the dotted line and join the army. And so I left for basic training in 2002, and was eventually made my way. I was stationed here in Savannah, and then as soon as I got here, was deployed and just spent my army career on deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, back and forth, um, and then I got out in '06 and started ministry then. So I was a pastor at a small church for 1 year exactly to the day. I make brief mention of that in the book, and then started pastoring at the church I have been at since then. So that's sort of the journey in terms of education. I'm a graduate of Baptist College of Florida, Knox Theological Seminary, and concluding my PhD studies at Faulkner University in Alabama. So I
Yeah.
guess I'll mention as well that I am the founding president of the Institute of Pastoral and Theological Training in Egbe, Nigeria, which is in southern Nigeria. It's in a rural community, and the focus of the school is to offer bachelor's and master's level education, seminary education, to men who otherwise do not really have access to formal education, because it is rural, because it is impoverished. And so at this point, we've been able to build a facility, quite a large facility, with the support of many churches and Christians here in the U.S. and Nigeria. I go there once or twice a year. We have a staff now of several workers and faculty, and we're training men for the work of the ministry, and even have a diploma study for women who are interested in theological studies, for their own personal edification, and for whatever kind of ministry they do in their local church. So I've been doing that for 12 years, and it's going great. I'm very excited about that work, and pray the Lord continues to bless it. So that's the short
And
version.
that's awesome. There's a lot in there that I'd like to get involved with conversation with you, but now is not totally the time
Sure.
for that. The more that we end up talking, there is so much overlap between your life and your lived experiences and mine. It's really fascinating to me, honestly, and
Yeah,
I can't wait till we get a chance to hang out in Savannah sometime and
absolutely.
talk through some of these things, because even with this stuff with New Mexico, I mean, it's almost like every time we talk, there's a new facet of overlap
Right.
that's really fascinating to me, and questions that I have about how you are able to maintain a Christian ethic through very specific things that I, I I'm unsure that I would be able to. So
Hmm.
things things of my non-Christian past that I do not believe that I would be able to do as a Christian, right? So
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
I'd love to talk through some of that with you sometime. But today, like I said, we're talking about this book that you wrote with your friend Nicholas Alford, who apparently doesn't know how to spell his own first name.
It's
Um,
true.
right.
No H.
So, in praise of old guys. So everybody go out, get this book. It's really good. It's not a large volume, but there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And you put it together a couple of years ago, right? So it's been out for like 2 3 years now. Um,
Yeah, that's right.
so what was it that caused you guys to want to write this book to begin with?
Well, Nick and I had different experiences coming into ministry. So I am, by my own personal nature, and certainly by my human nature, but certainly um, my disposition as an individual is to be very uh, not just individualistic, but to be sort of a hard charging sort of trailblazer in life. And if I see something I want to do and go after, I run to it, and I sometimes make a lot of messes along the way and try and clean them up afterwards, and uh, and so I don't always go through all of the steps that maybe I should have gone through that would have helped to not create some of those messes along the way. And so when I got into ministry, I was in Bible college, and then I went straight into a ministry that I was young, I was arrogant, I was prideful, and I certainly had this mindset that it really didn't matter much about what the church was. I was going to go, and I was going to change it, and I was going to make sure that by the time I left there, their theology was straightened out, and these people were they were 5 point Calvinists, and they were thinking clearly about the sovereignty of God. Well, that certainly didn't happen. And 1 year to the day of me arriving there, I left there, and thank God that there was another ministry available for me to step into. So in my experience pastorally is sort of I guess, for lack of better terms, we could say it was all on the job experience. And I learned what I learned not by listening to older men and getting their wisdom, or having an internship, or being able to sit on an eldership and learn from others along the way. But mine was through sort of trial and error, and unfortunately a lot of error that I think could have, in the end, I'm thankful for where things are and what the Lord has done and how He's preserved us. But I think a lot of things that could have turned out better, um, had I taken a different route in terms of being patient and being properly prepared. So Nick Alford, on the other hand, he waited later on in his life. He was in seminary, and so from there he went on to do an internship. He moved his family across the country so he could do an internship in a church and learn under someone he knew who was wise and very well respected as a Reformed Baptist pastor of 40 years, I believe, in ministry, and was able to learn from him, to sit under his preaching and teaching, and to have daily time with him in his study, doing visitations, preaching, going over sermons, things like that. And so we thought just talking our our different perspectives from our experiences would be a helpful way of encouraging, especially young men, but all Christians really, but especially young men interested in ministry, especially to take the wise path of having someone who they submit themselves to, who they trust, and whose wisdom can be poured into their life because. Most young men are brash and prideful and assume that they have all the answers when in
Mhm.
fact we learn very quickly after we sort of get out of that phase of life that we knew far less than we thought we did, and we caused a lot more problems than we needed to. So
Right.
it's an appeal and encouragement to young Christians to do what the Bible tells us to do and to submit ourselves to those who are older, wiser, and have more experience in life to help us along the way.
Yeah. So there comes a point in our um, learning where we recognize that the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know. Right. So
Oh,
you
exactly.
start out with like you're pretty much a dummy,
Yep.
and you're just regurgitating, you know, things that you may or may not hear, and then you spike up this graph with real legitimate knowledge, but it's very baseline. It's very surface level. It's not really grounded in much, and then you reach this threshold where you start to understand, man, all of this deep, fascinating stuff that I know is really just the tip of the iceberg. And then you slide back down
Right.
in humility is what I'm saying. You begin to learn humility and patience, and
Hmm.
you're able to take that knowledge and hopefully expand on it to the point where you now have moved into a different stage of your life. Um, and one thing that I've noticed is with technology the way it is, the internet and all of this, we have access to like amazing amounts of information, some good, some
Right.
bad, whatever. Um, but what I've seen in churches generically and reformed churches since I've been a Christian is because a lot of people came to this Calvinistic surge and this reformed, as it were, surge, but they were not really grounded in everything that upheld that. They have since fallen crazy like into any number of things. So, how could something like that be prevented? You know, rather than what I saw was okay, Calvinism, man, that's amazing. That's almost the be all end all of all of this. Now I'm going to go crush everybody with that, rather than what would have been a more ideal situation for the younger people, because like you said, this what you're gearing this towards younger people because we venerate them, we look to them, and there's this
Right.
youthfulness that is, it's good, but it's something that we idolize, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I like the way you frame that. I think in our culture, especially, I mean, youthfulness is what it is, and we talk in the book about how much money is spent in our
Mhm.
economy every year
Right.
just trying to stay young, in how we look and how we act. And everyone has seen the 60-year-old mom trying to look like she's 25 and hang out with her daughter's friends, and the turtleneck pastors with the sport coat and the blue jeans, from the 90s still hanging on today, um, trying his hardest to be hip and cool. And that's because we look down on the idea that someone would have gray hair and that they would have some wrinkles, whereas
Mhm.
the Bible, on the other hand, really highlights these things as marks of life and marks of wisdom, that these are the ones that we should be seeking out and going after. And so, I think I talk often about Facebook theologians
Hmm.
and Google search Bible scholars, and it is unfortunate in many ways that while we have the internet as a tremendous resource that I'm so thankful that we have, that the Lord has
Hmm.
allowed us to have, at the same time, it has turned every Tom, Dick, and Harry into an armchair expert on every matter. And so,
Hmm.
we see it on social media just in cultural issues. One week, everyone is an expert on foreign policy in Afghanistan, and then the next week, everyone's
Hmm.
an infectious disease doctor, and then the next, it just goes on and
Yeah.
on. Everyone thinks they know everything about everything because they read one article that they Google searched, and now they're online, assuming it's their job to set everyone straight. And unfortunately, that kind of thing really appeals to young people, and especially young men, because they have, I think there is something about men in general and young men especially, where we are generally built to have something of a combativeness within us,
Hmm.
which I think, when properly utilized and properly channeled, is a good thing. That's sort of that thing that kicks in when we need to be protectors.
Hmm.
That we need to rise to the occasion to protect our wives and our children, especially, and the women and children of society in general. So we need that, but when it's improperly utilized, it turns into a sledgehammer that
Hmm.
we use whenever we see something we don't like or we disagree with. And so the idea of reading something that someone wrote or said that is slightly different from what we understand to be true,
Hmm.
there's no way we can let that pass. I
Right.
just can't allow that to hang out there on the internet, because someone might read it and get the wrong idea. And if I don't go and win that argument, then who knows what's going to happen? Christianity is going to fail. The church is going to collapse. I need to get on Facebook and spend my time doing this. When the reality is, many of these young guys, they don't actually know what they're talking about in the first place, because they haven't gone back to the sources.
Right.
They haven't,
Right.
first of all, their Bibles. I'm convinced that many young men who get into these arguments are actually quite biblically illiterate.
Hmm.
They don't understand the scriptures in the way they think they do. They read an article, they listened to maybe a sermon, if that. They have a few sources, but they haven't read the historic works of the church. They don't understand the historical pattern that has unfolded through the generations to get where we've gotten,
Hmm.
and so they know a few things, and those few things are going to use as a sledgehammer to hit everything they can find. And so I think the way forward is not only for any young man to put himself under the wise counsel of someone who's an older, more mature Christian, but also to spend time just immersing oneself, first and foremost, of course, in the Bible, but also the most important, the best works of antiquity. and
Hmm.
and that's not just Christian books and theology books, but I think the books in general that have shaped the way we think about the world around us, and particularly for us in our context in Western civilization.
Yeah, you've talked about a couple of things in there that I'd like to explore a little bit more. Um, when we come back from our break, we're going to hear from our sponsors and hear from the streets here. We would like to normalize Christians going out and sharing the gospel. So we're going to go hear from somebody who goes out to either abortion clinics, universities, or just out in general sharing the gospel. And if you have a 3 to 5 minute story about doing this, please send it to us. We would love to share it here. Something either dealing with the spiritual aspect of that encounter or engagement, or just a funny story or a very serious story of somebody coming to the Lord, or some sort of physical attack that happens. We want to encourage people to go to the streets and share the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we will be right back.
We are Titus 2 women, seeking to glorify God through the teaching of younger women, biblically, to love their husbands, children, and be keepers of the home.
Not grudgingly or as a legalistic chore, but rather to joyfully sacrifice in loving their husband and children as unto the Lord.
Giving glory to God and finding joy in caring for our families in only the way wives and mothers can.
As God has blessed us with female traits that make our work in the home essential to a godly home.
Okay. Well, I'll do the most recent one that comes to my mind in terms of related with abortion. So, as I'm sure you've heard, Pastor Blake Gideon is all now. Okay, hold on. Let me plug the power cord into my computer. Okay. All right. Is it coming through? All right. Pastor Blake Gideon, he used to be the attack dog for the local Southern Baptists against the abolitionists, and now he's a strong abolitionist. Well, anyway, he takes his people every Thursday to the abortion mill in Oklahoma City, and so lots of times I like to try to catch up with him down there, and I guess it was maybe 3 months back. I showed up and he was already there with a lot of members of his church, and they were preaching, and he was gracious enough to I don't try to interfere with their time too much because they got to be gone to go. They actually go minister at a homeless shelter afterwards, but they let me do some preaching down there, and so I was preaching. And we're blessed in Oklahoma City in that we can use amplification. I mean, we can go as loud as we want, which is not the case apparently in Tulsa. So we don't know what the effect was, but we all know that there was a girl and her boyfriend sitting in a car, and she was going in and out, obviously. I don't know what she's doing, having something to do with abortion. He kept sitting there, and both of them are clearly listening to us. And I'm like nudging Blake going, keep it going. They're listening. I can tell they're listening. And we just kept cycling through, all of us preaching. And then Blake had to go. And I could tell that Blake kind of felt a little bit downhearted, that it just seemed like we really poured our hearts out that day. And we kind of thought them or somebody else we just thought someone was going to respond. Sometimes a lot of times nothing, but this, it just felt like something was going to happen and nothing did. And so Blake had to go, and he took his church members with him. And I remained back with some other people, and we kind of kept doing the same thing. And then all of a car comes screeching up and drives up into the abortion clinic parking lot, circles around, and when you do an abortion clinic ministry, you don't like a lot of sudden movements, particularly from cars. But anyway, it turns around real fast and zips to the gate right buy all of us. And so you're like, and in Oklahoma, we're open carry state, so Free Will Baptist ministers are always packing. I'll just let you know that. But anyway, so we're all nervous. This car comes slamming up, and a woman steps out with tears pouring out her eyes. And she starts to tell us, my daughter was just here. She was in a car that was a lot like this. And that was the car of the couple that we saw. And she said, I just got a call from her that she said she can't go through with it. She's not going to do it. And she said, last night she was telling me she was going to get an abortion. I was trying to talk her out of it, but she wouldn't listen to me. And she said that she called me and said that there were some guys out there preaching. And the more they'd preach, the more nervous she was getting. And the more they would preach, the more nervous she was getting. And she just started feeling, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Until finally, and I'm telling you, a lot of fire and brimstone was coming out that day too, And so, and tears just pouring out her eyes. And she said, matter of fact, I'm fixing to meet her down the street and she described the girl, and it was the girl that we had seen. Apparently her boyfriend had kicked her out of the car, and after she decided to take another route, but she just started hugging all of us out there, saying, because of you, I'm now going to have my fourth grandchild. I will see my fourth grandchild. And she just kept crying and crying. And with no one even saying anything, I don't know how it started, but suddenly people started pulling money out of their pockets and handing it to her, saying, this is for your grandbaby. And I don't know how much got collected. Nobody had said nothing. Nobody solicited anything. And before we know it, she's like crying even harder now. And then now I'm crying. And so it's not really a story about a personal spiritual salvation that we know. There could have been salvation involved in this girl changing her mind. We don't know. But one thing's for sure, there was a salvation of the baby's life that day. And so that was probably the last thing like that I was involved with that really stands out in my head related to the gospel having power in the midst of evil. And so I just wanted to encourage people with that. And then, of course, I'm calling up Blake going, hey, Blake, there's something that you don't know that happened that you were involved with. And so then Blake is super excited because I could tell he's feeling down, like, the heavens were brass and nothing was happening. And so he was encouraged, and everyone was excited because we're all like, man, this lady's crying. So that's kind of the last thing that I can think of about the power of the gospel, because I'm telling you, we were preaching the gospel, and it's the gospel can stop a lot of evil. So that's my story.
It's no secret that true masculinity is being lost. We are attempting to recapture the essence of true godly manhood, biblically balanced just as the Lord intends it to be. We do this by highlighting the interest of the everyday man and pointing them to real wisdom only found in the gospel. One of our top priorities is to shine light on and support ministries on the front lines battling the evil deeds of the flesh and Satan. A portion of all online sales go to ministries such as Resisting Balaam and Bridge Ministries Laredo to further the kingdom and bring glory to his name. So who are we? We are husbands. We are fathers. We are sons. We are friends. And we are brothers. We are reformed man.
Okay, we want to thank our sponsors, and I hope you enjoyed that segment and that story. Please send one to us at KALICORE@yahoo.com. We would love to highlight your story. So we're back with Nick Kennicott, and we're talking about his book In Praise of Old Guys, and one of the things that he was talking about was the way that we idolatrize, or the way that we look at youth, and there's a certain corollary that we see with the way that the youth look, their strength, the physical, not just appearance, but also their abilities, um, and specifically men. That's what we've been talking about. And you made this point to talk about the combativeness, the willingness to go and fight, and how we ought to harness that, show restraint, but use it for protection, and which I think is what it's designed for, right? To
Yeah.
protect self, family, country, or community
Yes.
as you go out, right? So there's something in men that we need to harness, which is this restraint, but also the knowing when to be violent, right? And
Yes.
and
Yes.
apply that violence with a Christian ethic, right? And but that takes training, that takes discipline, and a lot of times that discipline comes from that older man who, like you said, has the wrinkles, has the sunspots from, being 60 years old, 50 years old, has the gray hair, has the gray beard, has the scars from previous battles. All of these things are they point to a lived experience of the trials that you as the younger person are now taking over, right? So what we're seeing here is a passing of the baton, as it were, right?
Yeah.
Where the older man no longer has the same strength that he once did, right? The same agility, the same speed, um, but he has the experience. So it's from that the younger should look to that gray beard, look to that scar across their face, and okay, what is that about, right? So the scar might come from some lived experience that the older could prevent in the younger, or or it might have been something that saved his life. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing, but it's an experience to share with the younger, because we want to have the younger generation better than we were,
That's
right?
right.
That so I really appreciated that part in your book, right? I love my gray beard. I,
I
you
do
know,
too.
when I was hanging out with all my grandkids, a hurricane hit a couple of years ago, and we were burning some stuff, and we had an accident, and I burned my beard off, like 4 years ago, and all of the grandkids
Whoa.
freaked out. They're like, "Your beard's broken," but it's grown back now, and I really actually I love it, right? There's something about getting older that I really appreciate, and some of that is seeing the younger, right? Seeing that
Yeah.
they can do what I no longer can, but I can help
Yeah.
them do it better. And that was one of the
Sure.
things I got from your book.
Yeah, one of the things I have loved pastorally, Callie, is that I have young people in our church who I met now when they were like in 6th grade,
Hmm.
who now I have been able to marry them, and
Hmm.
then their children have been born, and now to watch them not only as a married couple but now as parents.
Hmm.
In many cases, I met them young, baptized them, married them, now seeing their babies born. I mean, it's just an amazing thing to watch, and to watch their maturity along the way, to watch them grow, to watch them develop, and to continue to see how that process goes. And um, I think one of the things that I've learned, and one of the things that's been important to me is seeing sort of where I was back in those days. And when you're young, everything is of utmost importance. If I believe it, if I think it, it's the most important thing, no matter what it is. It's how okay, the sky is blue, but it's a certain shade of blue, and I'm going to give you the number on the color palette of the shade of blue it is, and if you disagree with me, we're going to fight about it.
Well,
Again,
the
there's
the
that
color palette
combativeness.
is irrelevant. What we're talking about is frequency. So when we're talking about
Right,
light
right.
coming in, no, just
Exactly,
something like that,
exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yes, and we're gonna, and it's like all of a sudden my life is eaten up by this, and I'm gonna go find the argument and find the stats, and again, so there's this argumentative spirit, this everything, and so again, there's something good and helpful about that, but as we get older, we look back and we say, I really majored on the minors
Right.
and I cared so much about things that really, in the long run, don't matter. And it's really okay to let someone say something or think something that is not of utmost importance without me having to intervene all of the time. And I heard a great quote years ago. Sinclair Ferguson was being interviewed, and he was talking about the fact that there were so many young men coming for the first time in their life to discover Reformed theology. And he was talking about the fact, as you mentioned earlier, that a lot of guys discover Reformed theology. They don't understand it right away. They don't understand the historical roots of it. They don't understand that it's more than the 5 points of Calvinism. And he was getting on some of his older uh, sort of contemporaries, saying to them, you guys are so hard on these young men all the time, telling them that they don't have it all figured out. Therefore, they're not Reformed. Therefore, they shouldn't call themselves Calvinists, blah, 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 blah. And he said, hasn't the Lord been patient with you working through these things? I thought we were the ones who believed in a sovereign and gracious God. If this is as true as we believe it is, then we need to be patient, trust the Holy Spirit, trust God in His sovereignty that He will bring them along, and He will use us to patiently bring them along as He sees fit. But we need not just sort of cram it down their throat and say, until you have it perfected, you cannot claim this as what
Right.
you are and what you believe. How terrible of a turnoff that is, and unfortunately, I think that's so often the case, and so young men pick up on that and they seize on that, and so there are an Arminian one day and a Calvinist the next day, and everyone else is a heretic the day they become what they weren't the day before, and that's such a danger. And so I think I think the other side of this, Callie, is that we not only need older, wiser men with experience and with the gray hairs and with the knowledge and understanding of the scriptures and patience and wisdom and everything else, but they need to be strong and willing to say hard things to young guys.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
as a pastor of a lot of young men, I see that as one of my most important jobs, is to rough them up and get in their face a little bit. They need that. And that's
Right.
the combativeness that we talked about.
Right. It there's something real interesting about that, especially when we're talking about biblically, right? So if you do not discipline somebody, do you really love them? Right. And
Right.
not just our own children or grandchildren, there is that, but also as pastors with those that we shepherd, right? But also expecting them to do that to us, right? Yeah, because I'm prone to wander myself. I
Yes.
need
Yes.
somebody to like go, hey, you're deviating off of the path. Now, we ought to be doing that with each other. There ought to be some level of hierarchy where you take somebody's warnings and encouragement with a little bit more gravitas than you would say someone else, because there is an importance that comes with that experience, with that age, and just life experience, and going, hey, here is where you're messing up. I don't want the bad for you. Come on, let me help you. Come with me.
Yeah.
It's more than just going, hey, you're wrong, get your stuff together. It's come with me, right? Like I'm walking you through this because we need each other, right? And I
Exactly.
think from one aspect, there's not enough of that, right? From the older guy. So I don't
Yep.
see that as much as I think I should. I do see the, I'm going to cram this down your throat, tell you where you're wrong, but I don't see the coming alongside of them, which is part of the responsibility of the old guy
Right.
that your book says to, in praise of them, right?
Yeah. And I think, Callie, I think part of the issue there, one, we've sort of culturally we've lost the concept of the apprentice.
Right.
And
Hmm.
and there's very few areas you see that anymore. Some of the trades still do that, but by and large, culturally, we've sort of signed everything over to academia and have said, well, before you do anything else, you just need to go get your education, and then we'll give you a job. Well, look, I've been to seminary, and I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful for all I learned and everything else, but there's no way seminary could have ever prepared me for the ministry of the local church. It's just not possible. There's no context in a sterile environment of academia where you can be prepared for that. And
Hmm.
so the idea is generally that you get a call to ministry, you go to seminary, and then we'll give you a pastorate. And man, it's like, good luck from there, especially if you're in a church then where you don't have elders who are older and more experienced, that are
Hmm.
willing to take a young man on and sort of lead him, and help lead him as he seeks to lead the church, as opposed to this idea. And there are a few models that are trying this. I'll give a shout out. I think the Reformed Baptist Seminary is working hard to try and do this. That to educate men to get sort of this formal training in sort of the seminary context, but to do so while they're within the context of the local church, under
Hmm.
the leadership, under the stewardship of their pastor or one of
Hmm.
their elders, that they're being led by them, they're being shepherded by them, they're being encouraged by them. There's follow-ups where they meet with the dean alongside whoever their mentor is, and so there's some of that at play, and I think that's such an important aspect that is missing,
Hmm.
that we just don't see anymore. And it's like everyone is either too busy, doesn't care, doesn't even, I didn't get that, so I'm not going to give that to anyone else.
Hmm.
I don't know what all the attitudes are, but I think it's treacherous, and I think the church in the long run is going to suffer because of it.
Right. Yeah. I can see that. I like how you brought that in from apprentice work, or mastering a skill from handed down from teacher to student, or right, the master to apprentice, because you can read and you can watch YouTube videos and learn the basics of a thing, right? You can do
Sure.
it. You really can. Um, but there's something different and impactful about having somebody tell you to go grind down 100 sheets of metal, right?
Hmm.
That at first seems like there is no purpose, but then as you're welding with that person, he shows you a technique that's totally made up, right? That he
Yeah.
has honed in over years of dealing with a thing that you just don't find on the YouTube, or you don't really get it's harder to remanufacture and make it your own when you don't have that one-on-one. It doesn't have to be one-on-one, but where you don't have that mentorship, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so I really appreciate how you brought that in. But we also need to look at it, and you've brought this out in your book, that it's not only humans or people that we're considering in this, right? We're seeing these older people and their lived experiences, but they're physical manifestations of thought, for a lack of better
Yes.
words, right? And
Yes.
so we have a history, a long history, 6,000 years worth of history, right?
Right.
That we have access to, and we have their experiences, their stories, right? Stories are important. Stories teach us through a storyline very specific philosophy, very specific ideas of how to put things into practice, right? So we have historical application of the thing that this old guy next to me is trying to teach me, right? So
Yeah.
when I was talking about the young Calvinist that's not moored in confessional frameworks, that's kind of what I'm talking about. There are very specific older books that can help ground you in that same type of experience that you see through that older guy, like the whole Fahrenheit 451, right? So
Right.
at the end they're
Right.
walking around the forest, but each person is in fact a book, right? So can you speak to that idea and how you bring that out in your book?
Yeah, so we have a chapter called "In Praise of Really Old Guys: Why Dead Theologians Are the Life of the Party," and it was one of my favorite chapters to actually write on. But and just for some background, uh, my education, my formal education, in terms of my PhD work, is in the great books of the Western world. It's 54 volumes compiled by Mortimer Adler of what he considered, and I think it's hard to disagree with, the most important works in terms of the formation of Western civilization. And
Mm-hmm.
so the whole idea behind that is that we are reading and understanding the great ideas and the not great ideas
Mm-hmm.
that have come together to bring us where we are in terms of how we think, how we reason, how we believe, and how we understand things in our modern context. And so it's a foolish endeavor to assume that we come into this world in sort of this environment where we're never going to sort of inherit certain things in terms of how we think and reason and believe, that aren't just sort of picked up in the atmosphere, in the environment in which we are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just a reality, and it's an inescapable reality. There's no way around it, and we need to acknowledge that. And the safe thing is not to, in my mind, it's not to assume that it's there, but we're going to try and ignore it and do a run around it when maybe we think it's harmful, but rather to read those things, to engage with those things, and to understand why we are where we are. What
Yeah.
were the thoughts? What were the lines of reasoning? What were all the ideas that came up that got us to where we are today? Um, and as you work through those, you begin to see, wait a second. These guys, as they're writing, they're not just writing some novel thoughts of their own. They're actually interacting with all of these other ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and they're without giving a direct quotation mark like you would have to do in sort of modern academic work, and with a
Mm-hmm.
footnote and all that stuff. But they were quoting these guys, and if you don't read the other sources, you don't even know that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
um, but when you read something like Plato or Aristotle, you begin to see these are ideas, these are questions that have been around since the beginning of time, and people have been
Mm-hmm.
trying to wrestle with these questions and with these ideas from the beginning of time. And
Mm-hmm.
then they've been interacting with each other. And oh, by the way, a lot of those ideas have either seeped into or have been something that our theology has responded to.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, most people don't realize that there are theological assertions that are made today, that are believed today, and that have been accepted as absolute truth, um, that uh, have their roots in some of the thinking of Plato or
Mm-hmm.
Aristotle.
Right.
Um, and so that doesn't make it wrong or bad, but I do think it's important that we at least have some understanding of what they were saying so that we can understand more readily how it is that the church has come to the conclusions they've come to.
Right.
I'm actually convinced that there are sections of Plato's Republic that Paul himself is responding to in like
Mm-hmm.
First Corinthians and the book of Romans.
Right.
I think when you understand what Plato wrote, I think it's inescapable to come to that conclusion. And why not? I mean,
Right.
Paul himself was referring and saying, some of your poets. Well, so you begin to understand now. Well, there was a difference between the philosophers and the poets, and they were at odds with one another. And Paul is brilliantly using both of them in his argumentation and in his letters. And so as we go through that process, and that's sort of the classical literature piece, and
Mm-hmm.
learning how stories are told, learning how grammar is used, learning how ideas are formed and what they come to, and then on from there into the theological, the writings of the church and where that came from and where that's gone. We stand on the shoulders of great, big, huge, massive giants.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the height of arrogance to assume that as people, we can just pick up our Bible and know all there is to know without studying the thinking and the reasoning of everyone else in the church from all of the years previous to us. We have got to be the most arrogant person alive to assume that. And so when someone
Mm-hmm.
tells you they don't need theology, they don't need books, they just have their Bible, that's all they need. That is a person who has a view of themselves that is far too high. They
Mm-hmm.
think far too highly of themselves to assume that they can do what the church has taken all this time to do,
Right.
just on their own. They'll figure
Right.
it out.
Yeah. That's really good. I appreciate how you talked about not only church writers of old that we should look at, um, that have struggled with the same controversies that we deal with, just
Yeah.
in in the context of their time, right? So how did they
Right.
struggle through these same types of controversies? But they appeal to the light of nature,
Yeah.
just as the apostles did, just as the creator who took on flesh did, right? So there's this appeal to old guys, right?
Yeah.
And we see that in the light of nature, where even heretics, atheists, and pagans recognize the value in doing this, right? So I really appreciate how you bring that out in your book, and at the end you have a list of books that you would recommend or suggest reading. It's a really good list. I think that's a fascinating PhD that you're doing, and it's something that I don't think a lot of even Christians are really accepting, which I think is to our detriment, right? Because a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of attacks on Christianity are exactly what you're talking about, right? There's this need to destroy all of the foundational hegemonic building blocks, whether it's from literature, because literature shows the ideas which create the construct in which we live. And there are people that recognize the power and importance of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what's missing, I think, and what I think your book brings out is how beneficial it is to the Christian to see that, to see how some of these pagan writers are talking about what we're talking about. They're talking about the creator. They're talking about
Yes.
the fall. They're talking about sin and all of its implications. They're talking about how what what is your duty as human, right? And
Mm-hmm.
because they're created in the image of God, that's what they're supposed to be thinking about.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
They're groping around, as it were, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, and a lot of times where they are right, they're it just shows the power of God in creation to reveal Himself, right, on how one ought to live, right, and so
Right.
when we can see those things and see how they have affected the human writers of the Bible, and how those writers are, hey, if you're going to look at me as one of these old guys you ought to be listening to, let me tell you where I'm getting this from. Because it is
Yeah.
special revelation given to you, but that special revelation comes through the form of general revelation. The
Absolutely.
histories within the Bible really actually happened, right? So that's
Yes.
they are true to life historical accounts that people outside of the Bible saw, heard about.
Yeah.
There's a reason why all of these stories are the same. Sure, they've been corrupted because people are corrupted, but they
Yeah.
saw a real life history, right? So
Exactly. Exactly.
why are we trying to separate God's special revelation from His general revelation? Why do we think that God would reveal Himself generally as not Himself, right?
Yeah. Well, I think, there's really, I think there's a fundamentalist idea sort of built into that way of thinking and going about theology and understanding who God is and what God is doing and has done. Um, and it's really, I think, a Gnostic idea,
Hmm.
um, that fundamentalists have embraced and love. And it's like, Christian good, non-Christian bad. And I have
Hmm.
these sort of robotic categories where I can't look at something and say, okay, obviously that's not Christian, but it's dealing with the same ideas and the same sort of ways of thinking about things, or at least asking the same questions that we want to answer as Christians. This is I mean, sort of the idea of Gnosticism and sort of and modern, well,
Hmm.
all fundamentalism is really modern in one sense, but that movement is looking at something like Acts 17 and what Paul does at the Areopagus and says that he shouldn't have done that, and that's
Hmm.
foolish. We shouldn't be interacting with the pagans and all of their gods and quoting their poets and everything else. If it's not Christian, I don't want anything to do with it. And man, what's happened as a result of that is the church has lost their seat at the table of public discourse.
Hmm.
And we need to work our way back
Well,
there to
they
be able to
haven't
have these.
lost their seat; they walked away from their seat.
Well, yeah, that's a good way to say it. Exactly. We've sort of abandoned it and asked someone else to come
Right.
take our place. Um and I think it's just such a it's such a uh what's the right, I'm trying to be generous. I think it's such a um it's just soft. I
Hmm.
think we have lost our sort of, people talk all the time now that, like, Christians have this notion that we're supposed to be nice
Mhm.
There's nothing in the Bible that tells us to be nice. Niceness and kindness are two different things.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, we've just said, we're going to study the things we know and understand and believe. We're always going to be the tone police and watch our tone and everything else. We're not going to have these conversations. And so, what need then is there to even think about the writings and the
Mhm.
ideas of those who aren't Christians? Because I'm not going to have anything to do with them.
Right.
We're just going to withdraw. We're going to sing our love songs to Jesus, and then go home and sort of live these nice lives behind our white picket fence until next Sunday. And so what point is there? What purpose is there to examine general revelation?
Mhm.
There isn't one.
Right.
I have what
Well,
I
God's
need,
going to
and
destroy
what
it all
you know,
anyways. So, and
exactly, he's
and
going
the
to burn
church
it
is all
all down.
spiritual. So, like,
Right,
what good
right.
is it? Church is the only thing that matters. That the kingdom of God, and specifically during that 1 hour, 2 hours that we're at church, that's where it's all about. Don't even sure you have to live in this world, so be a good citizen, but don't engage in politics, don't share the gospel out in the world. Don't actually do Christian things with
Right,
the general public, because we got that separation of church and state. You know what I mean?
right,
That
right, right.
that's
Exactly.
common kingdom stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how can we apply this? How can we apply this idea of um, older living guys who are likewise standing on the shoulders of these old dead guys?
Yeah.
What's a good way to apply that to our lives, specifically to the younger men, but then also to some of us older men? How can we do better about this?
Sure. Well, I think one of the interesting realities is that the older we get, as we said before, the more we know what we don't know. And so as a result of that, I think older men are reluctant to want to pour into younger men because they look at their own lives, they see their mistakes, they see all the trials they've walked through and the ways they've handled them, the regrets they have in life. And many older men come to the conclusion that who am I to tell someone else what to do and how to do it in their life? And so they just count themselves out as someone who actually has something to offer younger men. And the same for women the very same way, older women with younger women. Um, and I'm thankful that the writers that God used for the scriptures didn't think that way, right? I'm
Right.
thankful Paul didn't look at his life and say, I was a bad dude, and who am I to write to the churches and exhort them and teach them theologically? That's not what happened, because He's redeemed us by His grace. We are not who we were, and we are not who we will be as He continues to sanctify us. And in that, we have something tremendous to offer. And in fact, uh, not only from our successes and from our growth and our understanding and in our knowledge, but through our experiences, we have so much to offer. We
Mhm.
have so much to teach others through our failures. One of the
Mhm.
best teachers in life is our failures. And so I always want to encourage older men to say, look, you have more to offer than you think you do, and that may be just in the stories of life, in the
Right.
battle scars of living. You may not be this really uh, learned theological scholar. That's
Mhm.
fine. You have a lot to share with young men just because you've lived in this world and you've taken it on the chin time and time again, whether you've been a Christian your
Yeah.
whole life or for the last 6 months. You've got a lot to learn there. And so I think on that regard, I always want to encourage older men, find younger guys and be proactive about that. And then on the other side, younger guys need to go to these older men that they hear from, they respect. The old guy that sits in the corner doesn't say much, but when he does, everyone listens because it's going to be wisdom. He needs to go to that guy and find out how can I get with you? How can I
Right.
have coffee with you, have breakfast with you, come, hang out with you on the front porch? What is it going to take for me to just sit and soak in what you have to give me, whatever that is, because it's going to be far more valuable than anything I have planned this afternoon as I get on Google or whatever to fight people on Twitter.
Yeah, to go on with what you're saying, let me tell you how valuable that has been in my life as a pagan,
Yeah.
right? So in 1993, before I had any type of hostile conflict with the military type stuff, right? Before any of that, the two most impactful moments of my career was one, sitting and having lunch with a group of guys that jumped in World War II, right? Jumped
Wow.
into Normandy, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so by this point, I was already. I might have been master rated by that point. I was jump master either way, and
Yeah.
had a bunch of jumps and talking to this old guy, super old, and
Yeah.
he had a total of 6 jumps. And he's like, "Whoa, you guys got like 40 something jumps by that point." And I was like, "Dude, you've got 6, but let's hear about your 6 jumps." And he would
Let's
tell us,
compare.
right, he's telling us about the types of parachutes that they had, and
Oh,
just
man.
like the what happened on that day. And
Oh,
just that experience bolsters courage, right?
absolutely.
He shows you, hey, this is what fear is, and courage is not, you're not afraid of something. The courage
Mhm.
is harnessing that fear and stepping through the fire, as it were, right?
Yeah,
Jumping off that airplane with people shooting at you, not because you're not afraid, but because you're brave, right?
that's right.
Because you have a job to do, a mission to accomplish, people to protect. So impactful for me talking to, some, well, at that point, it was probably about like mid 80s, mid to late 80s guy who only had 5 jumps, 6 jumps, but they were legit Nazis
Yeah,
shooting at you,
amazing.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
There's something that like stuck with me from that point through all of the hostile conflict that I was in. The other was talking. One of the things that I did was work as an educator at the Resistance Training Laboratory in uh,
Mhm.
Camp McCall, right? And
Yep.
we had an opportunity quite often to run into um, military people that have very specific skill sets that have actually been either imprisoned or set up with different camps and stuff from Vietnam, because I'm old, right? So I'm again talking back in the 90s, right? So I'm talking about people from the Vietnam era, and just again sitting down, having lunch with them, leaving the lunch, and all of my food is on my plate because I'm so entrenched in what this guy went through, and then having that encourage me as an operator later to go, I'm not the only one that is doing this. I'm not the important thing here. I'm filling the role that this guy gave to me, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I'm he has moved on to, you know, research and development, or an instructor or whatever thing, because now I am the one that is doing the thing that he showed me. And those things
Yeah.
really impacted me on what I felt capable of doing, because a lot of the times you don't, you don't really feel capable being able to actually do the thing that you're supposed to do.
No doubt.
There,
Yeah.
and it goes back to something you said in your book. Your confidence, your arrogance pushes you past that capability level to fake it, right?
Yeah.
You may be close to being capable, right? You're almost there, but the things that you're being asked to do are well beyond what you, as a hyper trained expert in that field, but you're still being asked to do things that are beyond your capability, and
Yeah.
you have to fake it. But drawing back on the experiences of these mentors, or the old guy that you met 3 times over a period of months to hear their stories, you can draw on that to help you fake it, push you through the rest of the way.
Sure. Well, and then you have that relationship too. You've built that relationship, so when something comes up and you just say, "I don't know what to do. I don't know where to
Right,
turn." You have someone you can go to in the
right,
context of a relationship to say, "I need your help." Right?
right.
I'm glad. I it took me later, because I was such a dense, prideful young man. It took me later to realize that a lot of the themes of what we wrote about and what we're talking about are actually well built into a structure, into a framework like the military.
Hmm.
Um, sort of the idea of a chain of command and a rank structure.
Hmm.
And again, in principle, in theory,
Right,
guys of a higher rank have more experience, have more knowledge and understanding. In theory.
right,
We all know how that works out. But those are the guys that are in charge of you, and you report to them and they teach you. And that's the idea. It is that idea of the apprenticeship. And one of the things I love that the military does is the military insists, at
hmm,
least in the circles I was in, insists that you have a very strong knowledge and understanding of the historical background of what your
right,
unit has done, what the
right,
military has done, and you're rooted in that, and they emphasize that so strongly. You are rooted in a tradition. You are just
right,
a speck on this timeline, and if
right,
you think what you're going to do and how you're going to do it is so impactful and important, you've got something else coming, because you didn't jump into Normandy. And
right,
that guy in Normandy was being told, you
right.
think you're important, but you didn't do this or that, and it just goes on from there.
You're right. There is this big connection between how the church militant operates and the military operates with like that. Your importance is that your identity is us, right?
Right.
And that's what we have in the church. Your identity is in Christ. Now, as it is in
Yes.
Christ, go do this thing, right? The same thing in the military.
Right.
But also, when it comes to what you're talking about, praising old guys, you might have a first lieutenant that outranks the
A
E6
first
or
sergeant, a
E7,
sergeant.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But who is everybody going to actually go to for the direct action knowledge, right? Even the
That's right.
lieutenant recognizes, hey, I know
You better. His
right,
life's going to be
I,
miserable if not.
I recognize that I outrank, but the experience, you know, is here. But that builds the working relationship between the officers and the enlisted, right? So there's
Yeah.
this idea of, yes, the hierarchy is important, but built into that hierarchy is experience, right?
And I think maybe sort of a way to think about that is, and just for people who don't necessarily know what we're talking about, a first lieutenant, a second lieutenant, first lieutenant, they're officers, they're higher rank in terms of where they stand on the pecking order than those who are enlisted, but they're just like, they're fresh out of college.
Mhm.
This is their first stint in the military, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. Whereas someone who's a first sergeant, he's been in the Army for 15 years, going on tour. He's closer to retirement. He's been doing this thing for a long time. And And so while one outranks the other in terms of just pure rank on their collars, in terms of experience, there is this huge difference.
Mhm.
And I think one of the ways we can look at that, especially for young men in ministry, is look, you may have gone to seminary, you may have been raised in the church, you may now be the one that everyone calls pastor. But if
Mhm.
you think for 1 second you're going to go and be able to fix all the problems in someone's family better than the guy who has 7 children and raised them all and they're all godly people
And
who
has
are,
been married
you
for
know,
70
because you're
years.
called pastor. Yeah, exactly. Like, who do you think you are, dude?
Right.
Now, in terms of respect, in terms of who the church turns to for instruction, sure, you're their pastor. You need to preach the word to them.
Right.
But in terms of actual life experience, turning
Right.
to that guy and saying, how, you know, what do I, well, I don't have any kids. I don't know. How about you? If he's smart, if he's not an arrogant jerk, he's going to say, hey, why don't you go talk to so and so? He's done this for longer than I've been alive. He has
Right.
something to offer that I don't. I'm just going to sit back and listen myself.
Yeah. I think that's important. I want to hit at least one more thing.
Yeah.
We were talking about books and
Mhm.
old theologians versus pagan writings and whatever, and how even the apostles were referencing a lot of their current and even older philosophical ideas. And like you said, even today, we talk in terms of Aristotelian categories. We just do, right? But
Yep.
does that make us anti-Christian Greeks, right? So um,
Right.
I do want to talk about something specifically dealing with the Bible, though. So
Hmm.
and the King James in particular, right? And not what I'm not asking is dealing with the preserved text, right? Whether the King James is the only inspired, kept pure word, you know, my sheep hear my voice, and if you listen to the ESV, a stranger you will not follow type thing, right? That's not what
Right.
I'm talking about here. But there is something very important, not just to church history, but to society as a whole. The King James, right? The language that it's written in, the the structure, the format, the grammar, all of this, the content of it, specifically in that form, which is referenced so broadly in history. How, even looking at the Bible from a literary standpoint, I mean, obviously we know it
Hmm.
is the Word of God, but does that negate that we ought to look at it from a literary perspective and how that permeates even our culture and how we can glean from how we ought to think even through those aspects?
Yeah, well, I would go as far as saying, Callie, that I think that there are a lot of problems that arise when we don't think about the
Hmm.
Bible as literature.
Hmm.
And I think especially in terms of we've become so systematized that we have lost the category of a biblical theology. And I think that's because we don't think of the Bible as a cohesive whole, as one story from beginning to end, with parts along the way. But we just think of, okay, what's the Bible say about the doctrine of sin, about the
Hmm.
doctrine of angels, about, and so we just pick and choose instead of seeing this as a literary story, but not only a story, but an absolute masterpiece,
Hmm.
just in terms of, if you look at the Bible from a purely literary perspective, um, it is preeminent. I mean,
Hmm.
this is the greatest work of, in terms of the English language. Looking at the King James Bible, the greatest work of the English language. There's nothing that compares, and
Right.
I'm not just saying that as a Christian. You can find scores of
Right.
pagan scholars who agree with that and believe that to be the case.
Hmm.
Um, and And so what the King James Bible did was establish many things, as you were alluding to, with regard to the standard of our language in our culture.
Mhm.
There are uh, I one of the things I find fascinating about the King James Bible, for example, if you look at if you look at something like Milton wrote Paradise Lost, he had
Mhm.
like about 13,000 different words used in what he wrote. Um, but the whole King James Version Bible, there are only about 6,000 different words. And just, and the idea being that there is a simplicity
Mhm.
to the language for the common person to be able to
Mhm.
read and understand. And in so doing, that the beauty of what is being taught in those words is coming out. I think this is actually a really important corrective to many young scholars, young writers, young thinkers, as they assume they have to use all of this flowery, complex technical language
Mhm.
to sound smart, when the reality is the beauty of what you're writing comes out in the simplicity of how you're saying it,
Right.
and in concise ways of saying it, so that everyone can understand. And young preachers need to learn that as well. But that's one of the beautiful things as well. And as a result of that, many of the things that people talk about in our culture, and now unfortunately unknowingly talk about in our culture, are directly from the King James Bible.
Oh yeah.
the,
Mhm.
the the things they say and the way they say them are because they originated in the English translation of the Bible for King James. And
Right.
I think the more we read of that, obviously, it's important. Now, do I think it is the best version of the Bible to use today for preaching in our churches?
Yes.
No, I don't. You did,
So
but
I'm
uh, uh, but
it is the preserved
but
word. I mean,
yes, exactly. Uh, but if you're a preacher, if you're a theologian, and you're not
right.
referencing, reading the King James version of the Bible, you got problems, man. You
Yeah.
got big problems. You need to look at that and you need to understand it.
There's something that's really fascinating when not just looking at how words change over time and how specific grammar and literary devices change, but how often they don't, right? And
Yeah,
that can help us with our theology, but it also helps us how to learn to abstract in our everyday lives, right? Um,
yeah,
j- as a pagan, that's what I read was the King James, right? But there was
hmm,
something growing up as a kid reading it that really helped me on how I am to read literature, how I'm to do math, how am I
absolutely.
to learn things. There's a very specific pedagogical way that you only get from reading that kind of literature that helps you as a person look out into the world and draw from very specific patterns that you find in the grammar, right? Um,
Yes.
but also theologically, when like you were talking about, we've lost this big chunk of biblical theology because we don't read as a cohesive unit, but not just as a
Hmm.
cohesive unit, but you also talked about how few number of different words there are. Well, that plays a key role too, because then when you start seeing patterns of words that are put together used in a very specific way, well, now we're developing a sense of using the analogy of scripture, an analogy of faith, because there is a reason
Yeah,
why those word patterns are the same throughout scripture. And so,
right.
what is that reason, and what can I grab from that? But that helps us not only in our theology, but in real life, right? So
Totally.
we recognize these patterns of things. Okay, who's going to teach us what those patterns of things are? I don't know, maybe the old guy that went through the exact same struggle that I went through. Maybe in a
Yeah.
different context, but like really, we all have this same struggle going from the fall into sin, our corruption and decay, and then being brought to a new life. And what does that mean for us now? Why do you want to struggle by yourself? Why do you think
Mhm.
that you're capable of doing it by yourself? I guess is a better
Yeah.
question. So,
Yeah.
well, I want to thank you for writing this book. It's been encouraging to me. Um, Guys, go out and get it. It's a really good book. It's not too long. It's really helpful, and hopefully it'll steer you into looking into this idea of resting on the works that have been already done for thousands of years. Right? Let's rely on some of what they have done, good and bad, and move forward through that. Nick, do you have any last minute encouragements that you'd like to give people?
Well, first, Callie, just thanks for having me on. I've enjoyed our conversation. I always like talking about this, and I think it's so important for our churches. I think it's so important just for our culture in general that we recapture an idea like this, and we really start to implement it in all of life. And this isn't just for the church. This isn't just for thinking through becoming a pastor and what that should look like. I really think a lot across the board in all of life, if we applied these principles, that we would be much better off as a society. And so, my encouragement, my parting words, I guess, are. It should go without saying, study your Bibles deeply, imbibe the Word of God, be in faithful, fervent prayer regularly. But on top of that, man, get off Facebook, get off Twitter, get off YouTube, put those things away for a while. They're tools, use them wisely. But my goodness, pick up some books and read. Get words into your mind and in your heart. And as you're doing that, find one or two old guys in your realm that have gray hair and experience in life, and figure out as soon as you possibly can how to sit down with them and eat breakfast, have coffee, sit on their front porch and listen to their stories. Or if you're an old guy, I'm pleading with you, young guys need you. And so I really want to encourage you to find some and pursue them and see if you can spend some time with them to encourage them along the way and help them through their trials and their struggles in life. But thanks for listening. Thanks for reading. And we'd love to get your feedback on the book and what you think and what you've learned and how you've been helped. And Lord willing, there may be more along these kinds of themes in the near future.
So, if you could recommend two books out of all of the books that people, hey, you should read these two books, what are those two books? And obviously not the Bible.
Yeah, well, oof. I mean, that's such a hard question. As maybe I'll just stick to to Christian books. I would say, The Marrow of Modern Divinity.
Yes. That's a
To
great
have an
one.
understanding of the marrow, and sort of, I guess, part B of that to tag on is The Whole Christ by Sigmund Ferguson.
Which was really great,
So I.
except for his pushing of the whole well meant offer thing. I mean, apart from that, it was an amazing book.
I was waiting for something like
Yeah.
this to come up.
No.
Yeah. So the
Two great books,
the
guys. Read them. Yeah.
yeah, I would say those, and then uh, you know, one I've fallen more and more in love with, and I think is so important for people is The Gospel Mystery of Sanctification by Walter Marshall.
Mhm.
Another old book that I think deals with sanctification better than anyone I've read since, and even newer books that were supposed to replace it, if you will, in sort of the Christian tome have not. And I think that is really helpful as we think through where we're headed in this journey and why we would seek the wisdom and guidance of others. So
And that's
the
awesome.
gospel mystery of sanctification.
Okay, you got 3 books from Nick then. I would recommend Gurnell, The Whole Armor of God. That's a really good one. And The Mystery of Providence by Flavel. That's probably one of my favorite books. Good stuff there. All right, thanks a lot, Nick. To our listeners, let me tell you to join the resistance and wield the sword of truth. Our Lord has left us here to navigate through this world as priests in the kingdom of God. Apply the mind of Christ and battle against the culture that hates God and loves death.